Good evening and welcome to this Telegraph Special Investigations event, Held to Account. Thank you for joining us, wherever in the world you are. We in London have ended up timing this virtual event well in a week of travel chaos with strikes all over the place. My name is Ed Cumming. I'm a senior feature writer on the paper, but this evening my role is really just to introduce the brilliant Claire Newell, Telegraph's investigations editor. Tonight, you'll be hearing from her firsthand what it's like to be an investigative journalist and how it feels to capture some of the paper's biggest scoops. For those of you who don't know, on features, the desk I work on, we tend to work to tight deadlines, following up stories that have been in the news that day, or interviewing actors and writers and other people in the news about upcoming projects. Investigations, however, is where arguably the newspaper's most important work takes place. Even to the rest of us, they're a mysterious unit. They have their own private office within the Telegraph office with opaque walls, so the rest of us cannot see what they're working on. They work for months or even years on their stories, going undercover, assuming different identities, enduring reams of data and dead ends in the hope of landing huge exclusives. Then, when they are ready, Claire and her team emerge with stories that lead the news. They have exposed corruption and greed in English football, politicians for hire, and countless other cases of abuse. As a result of Claire's work, there have been parliamentary inquiries, police investigations, and many resignations. At the Press Awards in 2020, she won News Reporter of the Year, and the team won Investigation of the Year, Front Page of the Year, and Scoop of the Year for their investigation into the Me Too accusations against Philip Green. Claire, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I expect I'm as curious as the readers to learn about how exactly you do what you do. I have a few general questions and some specific queries about your biggest hits. And I know the audience have lots of questions too. My first question is a simple one, and it's really, what do you do all day?
That's a good question. So generally, at the start of an investigation, you might get a tip-off and you will ask yourselves and the team the question, does this seem like it might be true? Let's do some reading around it. So we do something called a cut search to check, what's been written so far, is it a news story if we can land it? And we kind of spend some time thinking it over. We might talk to the head of news or the editor and say, if we can land this, would you be interested? And then the next question is, if we are going to do it, well, who knows if this is true? And you have to kind of think, who in the world could be our sources? How many people are there? And do any documents exist? So you kind of draw up a list in your head, almost your kind of plan of attack. And then, this is the quite difficult bit, sometimes you will agonise for weeks or months about how to do it because it's not necessarily simple. There might be, for example, a football agent who knows about a bribe being paid to a manager, or there might be a businessman who knows that an MP is secretly taking money, but they're not going to tell you that. It'd be absolutely mad to spill their guts. So you'd have to think, how can I prove it? And you kind of plot your way, trying to pick up evidence as you go so that we'd have enough to be able to publish. And best case, it can take a couple of weeks because someone will talk to you quickly or you get some documents from a source really fast. And other times it could take years. So, it's a varied process.
So your day is spent sort of reading or on the phone, or are you out meeting people?
So all of those. So sometimes you might spend a whole week reading loads of documents and think, well, what is here? And you've got your highlighter and you've got your notebook and you've got your Post-its. And we have a little office in the Telegraph, our investigations room. And we've been working on a story recently where there are just dozens and dozens of documents. And to try to get across that, you might start putting them all over the wall and trying to kind of plan out a chronology and to try to work out what is significant. And in many ways, it's a bit like being a lawyer in terms of doing that kind of thing. Other times you might be out and about a lot. You might need to travel up to Scotland or go to Paris or America to go and interview people and see what evidence they've got. And it is true to say that you do normally get more from people if you go in person. So I've always been a really big advocate of going to knock on someone's door, for example, one evening, and you can say, look, I'm a journalist at the Telegraph, I've been told blah-de-blah, I just want to find out if it's true. I'm sorry to come to your home, but I thought it was the best way to be able to talk to you. And sometimes they'll tell you everything. And similarly, you might decide to get on a plane and go to LA because if you go and speak to a lawyer in their office, they'll show you the documents. It's way better than doing it over Zoom. So it's a very long answer to your question of our work is really, really varied. And documents on the phone, out and about, standing around a lot, just watching. You know, there have been times where I've sat in a restaurant just watching someone, trying to work out what's going on with a kind of iffy-looking businessman.
And internally, obviously, that means quite a lot of resource, you know, that you're committing to these stories that may or may not come off ultimately, I suppose.
Yeah.
Do you have to sort of, how does that work? Do you have to kind of justify the time? Is there a conversation about what you're doing versus something else you might be doing? How do you know how to allocate your time best?
It's really difficult because there is an opportunity cost. You know, if we're kind of working on project A, it means that we're not giving our full attention to project B. And so I guess you're always trying to weigh up, is it a big enough story? Is it worth it? It's totally fine for you to spend a year on something, even full time potentially, if it's going to deliver an absolutely massive scoop. That's a no-brainer. But if it's kind of more middling, it is a much harder call. But because of that, we work really closely with the head of news and also the editor. So they help us make those decisions because ultimately they're going to have to decide if it's going to go on the front page or not. And if you're going to spend many months on something, you'd want it to be a front page story.
Mm. And you obviously, as you're going about these investigations, you have to keep everything, you know, very secretive and sort of to a tight crew. There's you mentioned the senior editors, but who else is in your team? How does that work? And you know, how did you decide to hire them?
Well, so there's 4 of us, including me, and I think I've always tried to think about people bringing different skills to the party. So you might have someone who's really excellent at FOIs and data. I think I'm really good at speaking to sources and getting information out of people. So you're trying to kind of build a team, all of whom complement each other very well and have different backgrounds. So Catherine, who's the Deputy Investigations Editor, actually has a business background. And that's a really good thing to bring to the investigations party. But, you know, you've got to develop new skills as well. I might not naturally be brilliant at everything, but I need to give it a go and we all need to work together, kind of pulling in a particular direction because there are lots of dead ends. You know, I think something that sets investigative journalists apart is you hit a dead end and the thing is you can't stop. The next question is, how are you going to get around it? So I often think of myself kind of bashing my head on my keyboard until I get a breakthrough. And it can be that you've got to step away from it, which is why you normally try to work on about, I don't know, 5 investigations at one time, because then you can go and work on one of those for a little while some thoughts percolate.
So something will have hit the buffers and you go and do something else for a while and then something
and you
will
have some
happen
inspiration.
or you'll have some moment of...
Yeah. And you think, hang on a minute, you know, there is someone else who knows, there's a secretary, you know, or something like that.
Right, okay. And that must be a satisfying moment when you...
Well, it's really, it's quite exciting sometimes. You get a real kind of adrenaline rush. You think, hang on a minute, or when you tell the rest of the team that you've made a breakthrough. But the best thing, just like for any journalist really, is when you land a story and you think, I've got it, I can prove it. So I worked on a story about Ian Paisley and I had a tip-off about him taking holidays that hadn't been declared. And I put it to him and he denied it. And I think it must have been about 4 years later when the DUP was suddenly super important with Theresa May's government that I remembered this tip-off and thought, hang on, I'm going to try to land that again. So I spent probably about 6 months working on it. And, you know, it was true and we published the story and he was really told off by the Parliamentary Commissioner and I think he was suspended or at least forced to apologise for what he had done. So that is really satisfying to know, I think for me, that I've kind of found the last piece of the puzzle.
It's very gratifying to hear that. I always sort of imagined that form of journalism with everything on the walls and drawing lines between everything and having these eureka moments when you go away was the stuff of Hollywood. So it's glad
But yeah, occasionally it happens in real life.
It happens to you.
Yeah.
Well, it's very good to hear. I thought we could maybe speak a bit about some of your kind of biggest hits, if that was okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps starting with your investigation into Philip Green in 2018, which was one of the paper's biggest stories of recent years, and a great coup for everyone involved. I just wondered whether you could tell us a bit about what that was and how it came about.
Yeah, of course. So it all started, like the best stories really, with a tip-off. It was a chance conversation when someone mentioned Philip Green's behaviour in terms of women. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, didn't you know? No, I didn't know that. And so, kind of true to form, drew up my hit list of people. How was I going to find out if it was true? And then I started approaching people who had worked with Philip Green, people who had been employed by him, people who had kind of business dealings. And I just asked them, look, I've heard that this man treats women particularly badly. Is there any truth in that? Can you tell me? And very quickly it emerged that lots of employees had made complaints against Green, both for sexual harassment, bullying and racism on occasion. And I was really shocked by this, but he was a billionaire, and so it was going to be difficult to get it in the paper because he was going to give us a tough time and put loads of lawyers on it. So I had to kind of build my evidence and kind of build a case that would prove this. So, I travelled around the country speaking to lots of people. The team at the time helped me out, and we tried to verify things. If one person said that they saw a woman's bottom being grabbed in the office, next question for us would be, what was the date of this and who else was there? And you start kind of building a picture, and then before you know it, you've got 10 people in a room who all saw the same thing, and that's pretty solid. And it's just building blocks. And each building block takes a very long time to be able to verify it. And there are some things that you can't verify, and you just have to kind of throw them out. But you kind of distill, and you end up with a set of very strong allegations. And it's at that point that you approach Green or whoever it is you're investigating for comment and say, look, this is what we found. We're coming to you. We want to know, what's your response to this? Because there's always a chance you've got it wrong. Sources, how can you prove that someone is telling you the truth? And it's part of responsible journalism to go to an organisation or a person and say, we're writing this story about you. What have you got to say about it? So that's what we did with Green. And I think we've got a recording of the phone conversation one of my colleagues, Daniel Foggo, made when he contacted Green, and you can hear what he said.
What he had to say.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, hi, is that Sir Philip?
Who's this?
My name's Daniel Foggo. I'm calling from the Daily Telegraph.
Can I just say to you, your girl was right about all over the place. I can give the list of a lot of the people she's called on, and she's found all. Nothing. Zero.
Well, she has found something, because she's found the items that I'm just putting to you now, which is that there's been these...
Your girl has found... You want me to give you a list of all the people whose doors she's knocked on? She's found a zero. Okay?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's zero, the fact that there's been these very, very expensive payouts to people who made claims against you of sexual and racial discrimination.
Fine. And who says these people, if they did make these claims, who says they're correct?
I'm not looking
Your
at this.
girl,
This is what
shall we go and let's get a list. Shall I get all the people whose doors you knocked on in a room?
Well,
ask them. They all told your girl to get lost.
Well, I don't think it would help, because obviously we know who we've spoken to, so irrespective
And
of what
so do I. Where is all this going?
Where is it going? Well, I mean, we are looking to publish an article.
Well, we'll like see you in court then.
Yeah, I mean, but what I really wanted to ask you is what your general response was to the allegations that you are bullying and intimidating.
I just told you I was prepared at the beginning to have a without prejudice conversation. You send your email. Don't be a smart ass, okay? You send your email, okay? I didn't just get born yesterday. It was your email. Look, you are trying to be a smart ass. I'm not going to give you any commentary at all. I told you at the beginning I'll have an without prejudice call. You've told me you've got some information you think reliable. You're going to send your email. I will give it to our lawyers and we'll go from there. How's that?
Okay, if that's your last word, fine. I'll send this over.
What do you mean? What word did you think you were going to get from me?
No. I'm doing exactly what I said I would do, which is.
I think you're trying to be a smart ass. Okay,
well,
you're telling me she's your boss. Why are you phoning? Why hasn't she got the balls to get on the telephone then?
Well, I mean, because we work together, we're colleagues.
Good. Enjoy yourself. Have fun. Right. We'll no doubt see you in court. You intend to publish?
Yeah, for Thursday. So publish tomorrow for Thursday.
I'm just telling you, take this message back to your editor. Okay, please, so we don't have to have a punch-up. I will personally sue your editor for damages that will be long beyond what he'll be able to earn if he lives to 1,000 years old. Get smart, right? You're making very damaging allegations, okay? I told you there's 30,000 people involved. There's millions of customers involved. And if you damage the business, he's going to need a new job. And your paper might end up bankrupt as well.
Just amazing to hear it. Every time I hear that, it surprises me again.
It's quite an insight, isn't it, into our job, and that pretty much every time you prepare a story, you're going to be contacting someone for comment. But seldom do you contact a billionaire with such serious allegations. You know, putting to him, you paid someone £1 million after they accused you of sexual harassment. What have you got to say to that? That is always going to be quite a hefty phone call. But I don't think I expected it to go on like that over a period of days, with him threatening the Telegraph with bankruptcy and lawyers and all the rest of it. Initially, I thought he might just answer the questions, but he didn't. And then I came in one morning, I think it was a Thursday morning, and my colleague said to me, we've been injuncted. So in fact, what followed those conversations was an injunction. And that was the next step of the investigation, because then we had to fight it. So we had to go to court and we had to argue, look, this is in the public interest. Of course we should be able to publish these allegations. They're really serious. It's about a high profile figure, employs loads of people in a company, many of whom are young women. It's in the public interest to let us do that. And that's always what you're arguing. Basically, does the public interest allow you to, does it outweigh someone's right to privacy, for example, or confidentiality, if there have been settlement agreements? But again, another thing I wasn't prepared for with this investigation is this legal fight went on for 6 months. So there was an initial hearing in the summer when actually the first judge found for us. He said, yeah, I agree, you should be able to publish. And we thought, brilliant, let's get ready. But then Philip Green's lawyers took us to the Court of Appeal, who essentially ordered an expedited trial. But in legal terms, that was like 3 or 4 months away. As journalists, we're used to, okay, expedited tomorrow or next week. And it wasn't like that at all. But it gave us a lot of time working with our lawyers, and obviously against his lawyers, to compile more evidence and refine our arguments. So we were ready. And I think it was scheduled for the beginning of February of the following year. And I was nervous, had a lot riding on it, but I also felt like we're going to win this. This is clearly in the public interest. I can't see any more kind of straightforward example. And then at the last minute, Green dropped it. So he dropped the injunction. So there was no need for a trial, and we published. And in terms of kind of job satisfaction, that had been a year in the making. And it was a massive moment for me as a journalist, but also the newspaper. it was a great story, and I felt like we delivered. You know, it was worth it, and we had explained what had been going on in Arcadia. We set out the allegations, and I felt like we'd done a good job for the people who had had a hard time. We'd told stories that Green and his lawyers were trying to repress.
Mm. When you got that response from him and from his lawyers, were there ever moments when your confidence kind of wavers, when you think, oh, hang on a sec, or was it so blustery that you thought, okay, well, we know we're right here?
I think the problem is with the judicial system, you never know. So a judge is going to make a decision, and you feel like, come on, this is a no-brainer, but it's entirely possible it might go against you. So in that sense, it's a very big gamble.
Mm. But you always had the full confidence of everyone here. And
I think we could always tell, this is a great story, you know? The moment there were people being paid £1 million, you know, I'd never heard anything like it.
Mm. And that was the last we heard of Philip Green.
Well, I don't think he would say that. I think he's probably on his yacht still doing something. You know, I don't quite know what these days. And obviously it'd been quite a difficult time for Arcadia and Topshop. But yeah, it was a big deal to write a story like that about a high-profile, very rich businessman.
And I mean, when you do something like that, you mentioned the kind of his victims and things, but who do you feel like you're kind of working for, if that makes sense? Is it the readers? Is it the public? Is it some sense of right?
I think, it's all of those kind of things, really. I think we were definitely driven by wanting to tell stories of people who have been silenced. You can imagine, from that phone call, working for Philip Green, and how frightening it would be to be spoken to like that on what seems to be a pretty regular basis. And I think it was incredibly difficult for people to speak out. And part of the investigation, I think the day 2, in the kind of journalistic sense, was us revealing how the internal investigations within Topshop and Arcadia actually hadn't been very upfront and honest. So there was a suggestion that some people had given testimony confirming some of the allegations, but that hadn't made it into the final report. And I think that if you're a senior executive in a company, putting Philip Green to one side, whilst I understand it's actually very difficult to stand up against him, say if you're the head of human resources or the head of legal or the head of a particular brand, you're kind of big enough and ugly enough to do it. And I think you've got a responsibility to very junior, impressionable employees who don't have a voice. And, at a bigger point, journalists, fourth estate and all of that, we are trying to highlight wrongdoing and expose things that we believe are in the public interest. So there's a kind of much bigger issues at play.
The point is that it shouldn't be the Telegraph that has to...
No, precisely. Well, ideally those things kind of wouldn't happen, to be honest. But they do. And it's up to journalists like us to try to expose them.
I think another story, to move on, that many readers will remember, your investigation into English football. The first story you did led to the England manager at the time, Sam Allardyce, resigning. And football fans watching may not realise, but they possibly have you to thank personally for Gareth Southgate's resurgent England
yes, exactly.
in recent years. And you also exposed kind of corruption in the game. And I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about kind of that work and how that all came about.
Well, that's a very different story. And what happened was, got a tip-off about a particular football manager being corrupt and taking bungs or bribes or backhanders, whatever you want to call them. So I thought, God, this is going to be hard to prove, but what a great story if you could. And so we decided we had quite a lot of prima facie evidence, but no one would go on the record. They were too frightened to stick their head above the parapet because it would mean they wouldn't work in English football again. So we had to sit down with the head of news and also the lawyers and put a justification together to be able to work undercover, to be able to get evidence that would prove that these people were involved in kind of dodgy behaviour. And And so almost unbelievably, we did that, and I said, okay, you know, I'll front it. I'll be basically a pretend football agent. We're saying we've got this company from, I think it was some Southeast Asian company with loads of money. They want to set up a football agency in London, have some of the biggest talent, and they want me to recruit the people. And the problem was I knew very little about football. So I would go and meet these agents, and sometimes, you know, they might have quite a strong accent or something, and I'd just say like, who, what, you know, who are you talking about? And they'd have to repeat the manager's name to me, and I'd be like, oh right, yeah, I know who you mean. But actually, I almost can't believe I did it, but I was undercover for about maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months, I think, which is crazy. That's a crazy way to live your life.
When you say undercover, sorry, what do you mean by that? You know, you have, there's like fake websites, there's fake email addresses, fake phones.
Exactly,
all of that. Do you dress differently? How does it all work?
A little bit. So my name, I think then, it was a couple of years ago now, was Claire Taylor. And we had a fake company that had fake emails, fake websites, fake phones, fake everything. And lots of what I said was fake. I'm obviously not someone who's trying to be a football agent. But we started the investigation by approaching some agents who we'd been told were really up to no good. And I kind of met them and said, oh, I've been given your name, you know, what do you think about coming to work for our company? Would you be interested? But you're going to have to tell me how it works here because we don't want to make any mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that was the start of it. You know, they brought me and some of my colleagues into this world where quite suddenly I was able to trot off whole chats about players. Oh, yeah, he's done like 3 assists and like 2 goals. I'm like, what was I talking about? You know, but we pulled it off and we managed to get really good evidence against these agents. And I think we've got some undercover video footage that we can show people.
Thanks to the scandals that have repeatedly rocked its worldwide governing body, FIFA, football's reputation has taken a real kicking. But what about closer to home? How healthy is football in the country which gave birth to it? Last year, the Daily Telegraph was passed information suggesting there was a malaise right at the very heart of the English game. Some managers were engaging in questionable behaviour, including taking bribes, bungs, for signing players. We tasked a team of undercover reporters with investigating. They started by approaching a number of carefully targeted football agents. The reporters claimed to work for a Southeast Asian investment fund which wanted to break into the football transfer market. 3 agents expressed a desire to work for the fictitious company, claiming they could open doors with football managers. Dax Price, a director at Forward Sports Agency, was keen to come on board.
So yeah, obviously the contacts, I've got every single telephone number for every single chairman, chief exec, manager of every single club in the Football League.
But he made clear from the outset that corruption was rife.
That's the trouble with this industry, everyone's getting looked after.
His business partner, Pino Pagliara, felt the same.
Listen, there's one thing that I've always been able to rely on, and that is the greed of general managers.
But even here, what about when it comes to
here it's even worse.
Is it?
I thought that the Italians were corrupt. Trust me, the English way.
Meanwhile, Dax Price had introduced our investigators to Tommy Wright, the assistant manager at Championship club Barnsley.
Yeah, but what I can do is back to settlement first week.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah, that I've known and seen. Yeah. And then we just have to do this spicy deal and whatever the dealings with it.
With Wright having agreed to help us sign up players, including those at his own club, Dax Price then explained there would be a price to pay for Tommy's advice.
Listen, we're going to have to look after Tommy anyway.
Yeah.
So we need to get that sorted as well.
Yeah.
Next time we met Tommy Wright, he accepted an envelope containing $5,000 in cash as payment for helping us make money out of his own club.
You're the man.
Thanks for help.
You're the man to do it.
He leaves with the money in his pocket.
Fantastic stuff again.
I think what's interesting about the video is you can see my kind of hair poking around, but actually I'm wearing a dress normally that's got a hidden camera
It is
inside.
going to ask her, where is that?
Yes,
It's
yes.
just-
So you
what,
get
in a
someone,
brooch or
No, you actually, well, this particular outfit, they would kind of dig a little hole into it that you wouldn't be able to see when you looked, but kind of deep inside is a hidden camera, just like a little scratch that comes through. And it's absolutely tiny, and it's operated by this kind of little device that's probably about the size of a matchbox. And so occasionally in those kind of meetings, it would be on my tummy, my hand would be on my tummy, and I would think, oh, is it warm? Because if it's warm, it's recording. So that's the kind of thing that you stress about if you're doing undercover work. Am I capturing this? Have I got the evidence?
So got it. And is it just the mic? Do you just the camera? Do you have a mic as
Yeah,
well? Do
there's
you
a
have
mic.
backup?
Oh, well,
There.
you do often try to think about backup. But say if it was just me, I would just have one recorder. I might have an audio recorder running as well as a kind of fail-safe. But if you were ever doing a really big meeting when you felt like it was really crucial about getting the evidence, there'd be two reporters, and then you both have cameras and try to get it.
Wow. And who does this stuff? Are there shops? Are there
Yeah,
specialists?
there's a particular company that kind of help you fit it and put it into particular clothes, which is great because I'm not tech savvy at all, and so kind of keeping on top of that stuff would be quite difficult. And with the video, we've just watched many hours of footage that we kind of made a short documentary that came out at the time of Football for Sale. But the people you saw, the two agents and the football manager, were, I think it was in 2019, convicted of bribery, so just before the pandemic, using the evidence that we found. It was passed to City of London police who prosecuted them, which again, it was quite a big moment, and it's kind of saying your investigation is thorough and it's reliable, and the police have taken that evidence to convict people.
But again, that shouldn't have been you that had to do it.
Well, no, exactly. That's true. Yeah, I think police budgets are so kind of understrained. Maybe they're reliant upon undercover journalists to bring all this stuff to fruition now.
And I mean, have there ever been moments when you've done all of those things where someone smelled a rat, or someone's caught you recording them or anything like that?
So no, luckily, no one's ever caught me recording them. There have definitely been times, say, halfway during a meeting, like an undercover meeting, that someone has just clocked something or, has had like a strange thought. Because of course, when you're doing these meetings, they're not like a normal chat. You're trying to get good quotes and good evidence. So the kind of questions that you're going to ask are totally bizarre and a bit like spelling it out for the tape. So if you're with a politician, for example, and you've just agreed to pay him 10 grand to put down a question, you would say a kind of for the tape question of something like, so this money is for the question, is that okay? And you're trying to make it kind of chatty, but there really are kind of nail-biting moments where you've got your heart in your mouth because you're forcing them to say it. You're making them spell it out, yes. So there's no ambiguity. And when I was watching that video, there's a section when the agent says, we're going to have to look after Tommy, by which he means, pay him a load of cash. And I say yes. But of course, that wasn't the best evidence at that point, because Tommy could have said, I didn't hear what you were saying, which is why it was so crucial to actually pay him the money. Because once he's taken the cash, there's no two ways about it. He's accepted a bribe.
Yeah, wow, amazing stuff. I mean, and I suppose with the Green case, you're perhaps more like plugged into who he was and his role. But if you said, as you said, didn't really know much about football, was that different for you because you were kind of working in this field that I guess hadn't meant so much to you before, but obviously means so much to other people? I
think stories like that and most investigations kind of come down to proving some kind of corruption or wrongdoing. So previously I'd done quite a lot of work on FIFA and corruption and bribery. And I kind of feel like I'm a corruption specialist. I can look at corruption in politics, in sport, wherever, and you just get the smell for it. So even though I might not care or know who's the manager of a particular club, the moment we're getting a whiff of some dodginess, then I'm very interested.
Yeah.
then I remember their name.
Well, there seems like there's plenty of it about. I wondered if, I mean, in the Sam Allardyce case, I think, he was not breaking the law, but he admitted to being a fool, and obviously he lost his job. Did you have any sympathy for him in that investigation? Or actually any of the other people you investigate? Do you ever kind of feel sorry for the people that...
Well, just to address the Sam Allardyce case, what the story was about, just in case people can't remember, is the top line was he'd negotiated a really lucrative 400 grand deal to do some kind of speaking tours for the Far East company that was setting up the football agency. And he made some ill-advised comments about third-party ownership, which was banned at the time and probably still is. And that's when people own part of a player, but it's not declared. So it's not owned by, Manchester United. In fact, you've got all these people in the background, and people have compared it to kind of modern day slavery. And also it's not particularly transparent. In terms of whether I felt sorry for him, I don't think I did, to be honest. I think when he's been around for a long time as a football manager. He was the manager of English football. Did I think he should be negotiating these deals in his spare time? Probably not, personally. He could just concentrate on his job, and he was being paid enough as it was. In general, it's a bit of a strange thing to say, but say being undercover in the football investigation generally, those agents, I actually quite liked them at points. They were actually quite funny. And when there was the trial, so I gave evidence for about 3 weeks in court, I was the kind of primary witness. I remember one of the barristers saying, but you like them and you laugh with them. And I say, yeah, because sometimes they're funny. And that's the truth about life. Even bad people, inverted commas, can be terribly likeable. But what I didn't like was the bribery, or I didn't like any of the other unsavoury comments they made. But I think it's understandable to also like a part of a person. And I think in general for smaller people, for want of a better word, so not the Prime Minister, not the manager of a football club, because they're paid a lot of money and they're very high profile, they should know better. But for people who don't necessarily have such big profile, I do feel sympathy for them when they're on the front page of a paper or exposed on the television, because I think that would be hard for any of us. And I think you've got to have empathy.
It's a great story as well, and I'm sure people watching will have more questions about your undercover activities.
Antics, yeah.
But I just, from my point of view, I wanted to sort of zoom in a bit on the past few years. Obviously the pandemic, and I know you've had a baby, presenting different sets of challenges to investigations. I wondered whether you could just talk a little bit about, how that has been for you and how you've continued the work during COVID, because there's been more great work out of investigations in that time.
It's been quite difficult, really, doing investigative journalism during the pandemic, mainly because for a big period of time, you weren't able to travel anywhere. So in terms of going around the country, knocking on people's doors, you weren't allowed to do it for risk of spreading the virus. So it definitely made our lives harder. And if you add to that, this was a running story. Every day I would wake up, probably like everybody else, and I'd check my phone or I'd listen to the radio to think, God, what terrible things happened today. It felt like it was unrelenting terribleness. But in terms of reporting within that and trying to think, well, what are the big stories? It was forever evolving. So you could start working on something and then it could suddenly change. It breaks off and that's not an issue anymore, or someone would scoop you over and over again, basically be scooped by the pandemic. And so we had to kind of pick things to work on that would, because all the pandemic stories were kind of rushing through, but hang on, let's dive into that. No one's having time to explore why there were so many deaths at a hospital near Manchester. So there was a hospital called Tameside Hospital where there were a very high number of deaths during 1 week. I think it was in October 2020. And so we spent probably about 3 months trying to work out why. But it was slow, trying to speak to sources, whether it was medical staff, whether it was people who were in that hospital, or relatives who may or may not have been able to visit. And you're trying to piece it together, get little kind of parts of the story. And you might use the Freedom of Information Act as well to get hospital documents talking about it, until you're ready to reveal that there were problems with infection control, essentially. A really kind of basic thing. If you think about MRSA, you know, an issue that was around 10, 15 years ago, it comes back to the same stuff with COVID. People need to be washing their hands, there need to be good separation of patients, and if there isn't, it could spread around a ward. And it seemed that on occasion, people who in fact were COVID positive, this is what relatives told us, that they were put alongside people who didn't already have COVID. So of course, you know, the virus is going to spread. But it was hard telling these stories, and I think we always try to aim to tell the story of people who don't have a voice, a bit like with the Philip Green investigation. So we looked at the misuse of do not resuscitate orders, and quite a lot had been written about how they were misused with elderly people. And they shouldn't have been on their files, but there was almost, you know, there aren't enough medics or hospital beds, let's put this on files. But we also found that in some cases they were used for people who had mental illness or a learning disability, which I actually found heartbreaking. And I think it made me feel like we were doing good public service journalism to expose these things.
And it goes on.
Yeah.
So this week there's a podcast.
Yeah, we've got a podcast out called Call Bethel, and we were doing a series of articles in the paper and online, and it's about us examining the way that the Jehovah's Witnesses have dealt with allegations of child sexual abuse among their members. And we received a tip-off last August, actually, so it shows how long investigations take, telling us that there was a secret database of abusers held by the Jehovah's Witness organisation. So people can follow us as we try to find out whether that's true. Fantastic,
and I'm sure there's links available to that.
Yes, please listen.
Tune in. That's everything that I had.
Great.
Well, these questions have been flooding in as we've been talking, so I'm going to ask some of these. And yeah, well, I think there's a few questions actually in this vein, but how did you become an investigative journalist?
Well, I started off as a kind of regular journalist, just a kind of regular general reporter, writing about anything I could and being really stressed that I never had enough stories really to kind of keep my job. And I used to go and do door knocks. I would be the case study specialist. So every kind of weekend, the paper I was on for my first job needed case studies for a focus, and that used to fall to me really late on a Friday night, and I had to turn it round by Saturday. So it was a kind of good test of speaking to people and being able to get information fast. But I've always really enjoyed researching things. I did an English degree, but I kind of probably should have done history. And I really love solving puzzles and piecing things together. So when I was at the Sunday Times, which was my first newspaper, I just kind of harassed them really to kind of give me a go. I wanted to help out on Insight. I felt like I could. And then one day, the head of news said to me, "Oh, we've had this tip-off about city academies and like money and people getting peerages and things. Why don't you work on that?" And 6 months later, it turned out to be the Cash for Honours investigation when the Prime Minister was ultimately questioned by the police. And, you know, it was a situation where in some ways I'd made my own luck, I proved myself, and that was my break really. And slowly I kind of moved full-time to investigations, and I joined. So I worked for Insight at the Sunday Times, and then I came to the Telegraph to set up a team here. And I think the interesting thing is it really suits my personality. You know, psychologically it really works. I'm really nosy, but I'm also very persistent. And I think, you know, they're qualities that every journalist needs. But as an investigative journalist, you really need that because you're going to get a lot of doors slammed in your face, a lot of people telling you to go away, a lot of dead ends, and your job is to think, how am I going to get through it?
And this actually leads into another question we've been asked by Andrea, which is, have you ever been told to stop investigating something, or threatened if you don't?
I don't think so. Definitely people I'm investigating don't like it sometimes. So Philip Green definitely did not like it.
No, it's clear, yeah.
And after a period of, I think I started that investigation probably in February of a particular year that I can't remember now. And by roughly April, May, he knew that I was investigating. And he made lots of calls to my colleagues at the newspaper. It's kind of curious, really, because as far as I know, he never tried to call me to say, what are you doing? Instead, he just called every man that seems to be employed here to moan about me and to say, oh, you know, she hasn't got anything, she needs to stop, about the kind of words that he was saying to Daniel, your girl's got nothing. You know, it was that kind of stuff. So people definitely don't like it when they know I'm on their tail. But investigative journalists normally have the bit between their teeth and you're not going to let go.
I mean, the calls are obviously unpleasant. Has there ever been anything more? Have you ever felt sort of genuinely, you know, worried or threatened or anything?
I don't think so. I was a bit worried when I did the football investigation. Some of the people I was investigating weren't the nicest, and paper actually put me up in a hotel for a little while, so I wasn't at home and I didn't have to kind of worry about them coming round. But it's hard to know sometimes, you know, is all of this in your head? I think I probably take it in my stride quite a lot. I'd probably worry much more about more junior members of the team. You know, there was a time, it was a long time ago now, where I was working on a particular story. It was something about child abuse, and I was on my way to meet a police officer, and another police officer called me with a force I've been in touch with, and he said, who are you going to meet? And I said, oh, your colleague, something like Mr. Snowball. He said, there is no Mr. Snowball, get off the train. Like, oh. But actually, it was all totally fine. There was a Mr. Snowball, but he'd retired and the other guy didn't know. So it was just loads of drama, but I felt like, oh my God, you know, what am I walking into? Going to meet someone in a car park, which is where I was going to meet them. So you're definitely paranoid sometimes, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean to say they're not following you.
No. And we've got another couple of questions here on a sort of similar theme. Jennifer wonders how much work was involved with lawyers before you went undercover.
Oh, a lot.
And how do you plan that? And then sort of the question from Robert, which is, can you still work undercover like that?
So no, I think realistically, I can't do undercover anymore. So when I had a baby, I came back to work and did a podcast called The Juggling Act, all about how on earth do you have a career and look after your child and see them occasionally. And as part of that, my kind of face was in the newspaper because I wrote features about it. So
and you're here.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm here right now. So I don't plan on doing any more undercover work. I did it for a long time. And I don't think it's the healthiest thing to do in your life. And there are many junior reporters who can take over the baton from me. And I obviously know a lot about undercover, so I feel able to run undercover operations. To answer the question about the lawyers, in order to be able to go undercover to investigate something, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. You've got to show that it's in the public interest. You've got to set out your evidence so far, why you can't find out another way, because you are breaching someone's privacy. So, you know, it's got to be proportionate.
And you have to know that it's already going on.
Exactly. You've got to have a good tip-off, a reliable tip-off. Because you couldn't just think, oh, I've got this great idea that this particular politician is, you know, taking money from Saudi Arabia. I'm going to go and find out. You need a tip.
Yeah. And then this is a question from Laura I'd be very interested in the answer in. When you're gathering evidence and I suppose building your stories, do you consider what the Telegraph's readers would be most interested in?
Oh, definitely at the kind of... Sorry, Cameron.
And do you know how you want the story to be told? How does that kind of... I mean, I think that's probably discussions we all have in all of our different bits of the paper.
Yeah, definitely. So when we decide what to work on, we definitely think about what are the readers going to be interested in, because there's no point doing it if no one's going to be interested. You know, that would be a failure for an investigation. In terms of how to present it, so almost you've got to get the story before you can decide that. And I think kind of news stories really tell themselves. You know, I learnt this thing when I was a kind of student, that if you've got loads of information, this is what I was doing a postgraduate course in journalism, imagine yourself running up a hill. You can only say one sentence when you get there, and that's the story. And sometimes I actually do that in my head. You know, I've got so much information. And I think that's your top line, you know, and a story kind of tells itself. What's harder is when you're kind of trying to do a more creative inside read. I think that's much more kind of up for discussion about how you might structure it and present it.
And then finally, there's a question. There's two questions from someone called Jeremy here. I don't know if they're the same Jeremy. Which is, do you have when things are going, when you're doing these interviews undercover, do you have other people nearby that could help out if things went south?
Definitely sometimes if I'm feeling like this isn't going to be very nice or has the potential to go wrong. So with the football investigation, I had to be in a car with some of the agents quite a lot of the time. There's quite a lot of money in that car, and I used to have a tracker in my handbag and someone following me around so they could see where I went. Or, you know, if I was doing a meeting in a particular restaurant, there would be someone else there just keeping an eye on things. Because I think you've got to be realistic. Stuff can get out of control quite quickly, especially if they realised they were being investigated.
There's a question from Howard, which is, what can legislators, journalists and others do to try to prevent future scandals?
Yeah, interesting. I think transparency is pretty key. And you've got to enforce that transparency. So you've got the members' register of interests, but perhaps regulators need a little bit more teeth and to be doing their own investigations. Lots of investigations that regulators launch, or even the police, seem to come from journalists, but perhaps they need to independently be a little bit more source-led and trying to hoover up information.
I mean, it's something I sometimes think, you know, in work that I do, but that almost all of the stories already exist. You know, you just need to sort of, and people are probably talking about them somewhere.
Yeah.
You just need to find a way to do it. So, I mean, a whistleblower is extremely important as well.
Oh, they're really important. And I think it's a tough life for a whistleblower a lot of the time. And I think as a society we could, so in America, for example, if you're a whistleblower who comes forward with information about a company doing wrongdoing, you get a massive payment if that works out. And I think on balance that's a good thing, because you're going to lose your job, and it also means that you're incentivized to come forward. Obviously they've got to check out the information to make sure that you're not lying or exaggerating to get the money. And I think Britain has a lot to learn from America in that sense about valuing whistleblowers, because if you blow the whistle in the UK, you're very likely to lose your job. You might end up with being investigated by the police, worst case, or maybe the company that you worked for. How much support is there for you financially or emotionally? Not very much. There's actually an organisation called the Signal Group that we're a part of here at the Telegraph, and they, depending on the story, do support whistleblowers financially and with legal support. And I think that's a good thing, and there could be a little bit more of that.
And how about the sort of the law? Where are we in terms of, you know, protecting people and encouraging transparency?
Well,
the things you'd like to see changed?
I don't know enough. I don't think there's good legislation in terms of whistleblowing legislation. I think it could definitely be toughened up, because I encounter whistleblowers quite a lot and they definitely don't feel protected. I think it's very difficult when people are working for companies. They will say, oh yeah, we want to hear what's going on, but actually someone pops their head up and says, oh, there's a real problem over here. You see it in the NHS time and time again, and they end up being gagged. And I think probably as a society we need to think about non-disclosure agreements, and they're fine if you're doing a financial deal and I'm sharing my sensitive commercial secrets with you, but I'm not sure they should be used otherwise.
And a question from Helen here: at what point when you're investigating, do you know, if you're exposing illegal activity, do the police get involved, or do you speak to them?
So on occasion we speak to the police. You've got to be a little bit circumspect as a journalist. You know, we're not an arm of the police, and there might be a time where we need to be a little bit careful of the police when it comes to our sources. But certainly with the football investigation, we had evidence of bribery there. So I think just before publication, we told them about it, and we said that we would pass them the evidence if they requested it. But you do have to be careful with those things because ultimately you've got to protect your sources.
Well, that's great, thanks. I think that's all we have time
Great,
for,
okay,
sadly.
thanks.
I'm sure there's a little bit of housekeeping here that I had to do for the end.
No, I can tell you about our podcast called Call Bethel.
There we go, that was one of them.
Sorry, I can remember these things. You can download it on Apple, where you get most podcasts, or Spotify, and you can also see it on the Telegraph website. And it's the first episode that was out on Tuesday.
And but for now, thanks very much, Claire. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I hope you found it as interesting as I have, and we will see you next time.